Hello everyone, I'm Tamara Banks. Mitch, so great to be back with you again today. You have a wonderful guest. Introduce us to
I
him.
do. I have somebody that has worked in the Denver Police Department around accidents and accident investigations almost his entire career. Back when I used to try these cases, when he was a detective, he would do an incredible job reconstructing car accidents and those types of offenses. And then he kind of raised through the ranks, kind of as I did, and now he's back as the lieutenant running that entire thing, and it's Lieutenant Rob Rock, and I'm just glad that he's here today.
Lieutenant, it's so great to have you, yeah.
Thanks.
So investigating these cases have got to be tough regardless, but talk a little bit about how difficult it is to cover and investigate the hit and run cases themselves.
Well, particularly the serious injury and the fatal hit and run accidents, those are where we tend to have, our greatest number of resources dedicated to that. But they are difficult. We oftentimes don't have a lot of evidence that's left at the scene. We may not have a lot of witnesses, particularly if they occur, at different times of the day, if it occurs late at night and there's not a lot of people out. So there are a lot of hurdles that we have to cover. And much like any other major incident, the quicker that we can get on the scene and start investigating those and follow up on leads, the better off we are. And oftentimes we've been successful in finding the suspect involved and presenting the case to the DA's office to file charges.
And it seemed like there was just a huge number, extremely high earlier this year. I know I was surprised. Were you surprised?
Well, we did see an increase this year as opposed to prior years, but some of the things that we're doing, though, we're also reaching out to the media a lot more to help us with these cases, because we have found that engaging the entire community and looking for these vehicles is a lot better than just a few of us trying to find them. And so I think it's been more in the public eye, and it's really brought attention to the to these collisions. But we see cycles, as the years go.
Tamara, the hit and runs, obviously, they are huge issues for us. But they're a subsection of what we're seeing on almost a daily basis, that car pedestrian accident. I have one of those magical phones, and I get the simulcast from the police department, and it doesn't go a day where I don't see auto pedestrian, auto bicycle, that type of thing. The hit and runs, that's what they leave the scene. But what we've got is a big problem with distracted drivers in Denver. People that are running yellow lights, people that are violating just simple traffic laws, people that are walking out in front of traffic because they're looking at their cell phones. So we've always had the issue of drunk drivers. Now we have the issue of drivers under the influence of marijuana and alcohol. But what we're seeing, a huge number of just distracted drivers that are then hitting people, that are killing people, and then there's a small group of them that are fleeing and making it really hard on everybody. But everybody needs to just put the cell phone down, keep their head up, drive their car, get to where they're going safely, and not hurt or kill anybody else. And if they do get in an accident, stay at the scene. Some of these accidents we see, it's not even the person that's at fault that leaves. But if you leave, then you are looking at prison time. And that's the message that we try to get across. The subsection of this whole problem, though, is that everybody needs to slow down, think about what you're doing. In a split second, you can end somebody's life. It might be somebody that's in the car with you that you love a lot. And all you got to do is look down at that phone and boom. Unfortunately, Rob and his team's going to be out there investigating it.
And that distraction doesn't take long and also sort of sticks with you, because people will say, well, I'm at a stoplight and I'm just checking it while I'm stopped. But when you're not sort of paying attention to the traffic, even when you've got a stoplight, you're engaged in that conversation in the text, right? Or in the phone call or in the email. And you kind of lose track of what's happening around you.
Certainly. And the thing that will happen sometimes is perhaps a pedestrian can't quite make it across the street in time. Cars will be stopped, the light changes, you're looking at your phone, you look up, you think, oh, I can go, and you don't even realize that other people are stopped yielding to somebody who entered the crosswalk lawfully, and they just weren't able to get across in time. I mean, we do have an aging population, and that we're working with traffic engineers at the various intersections to increase those times around retirement homes and things like that. But it's something that you have to be aware of. If something doesn't quite seem right to you, if you're approaching an intersection and other vehicles are stopped, maybe there's a good reason to start slowing down and pay attention. But and it even goes further than just even checking your phone. Listening to the radio too loud, or talking to someone on the telephone can be just as distracting. And there's a lot of research that's occurring in that field right now that's showing that your auditory response while driving, that it increases your ability to perceive and react to a situation that occurs in front of you. And when that's gone, you're really hindering yourself in your ability to perceive danger.
One person hit is certainly one too many, but do you have kind of a sense, numbers-wise, what kind of an increase we're looking at and how much of an impact there is?
Well, generally with auto pedestrian accidents, it's over 30% increase that we've seen so far this year. And I mean, there could be a number of factors that are involved in that. For instance, we did have a very warm January, and a lot more people were out walking around that may not have otherwise been. We saw a lot of snow come in May, and so we've seen somewhat of a decrease. So it just, until we can look at the whole year and then compare that to prior years, it's hard to really say, but I mean, it does look sensational when you take a small snapshot of a year right at the beginning.
And Denver's a really fit city, right? So you have a lot of runners out there, a lot of cyclists, people who are trying to get in shape, and they've got, like me, my earbuds on, I'm listening to, my favorite music. And even though it would be my fault if I ran against a light, still people need to be paying attention if you're in the vehicle that's maybe going 20, 25, 30 miles an hour.
Well, absolutely. And I can't tell you how many times we've gotten on the scene of a driver who was not at fault, who either hit a child or hit someone else, and I mean, it's devastating for them. They didn't leave their house that day or their job expecting to run into a person, and just that whole event shocks them.
Right. And how many unsolved cases do you have? I would imagine you have quite a number.
Well, we certainly do, and I like to break it down, talking about hit and runs specifically, and then like our auto pedestrian hit and runs, and our fatal hit and runs. So there's a lot of different numbers that get floating around out there. So, so far, my unit is about at a 66% solvability rate for your standard hit and run. That's somebody that backs into a car that's parked and takes off, or bumps into a car and leaves before the police get there, something to that effect. With our fatal hit and runs this year, we have solved all but one so far this year, and so that's worked out very well for us, and we attribute that to greater community awareness, greater community assistance, and greater media attention.
So having more eyes and ears out there, witnesses, people willing to step up, has got to be helpful in your
It's extremely
sense.
helpful. We've got great allies like Crime Stoppers. The fact that Rob and his unit and the police department get the word out, ask for help. The media is a huge help when it comes to getting us. The one that he's talking about that's unsolved is really one of the saddest ones that we have, and hopefully by the time we air this show that we'll have this one solved. But two little boys got run down in one of these spring snowstorms that we've talked about, and I keep in touch with Rob and his team and what they're doing and all the work they're doing to try to do that. These are an amazing group of investigators. They always have been. They're dealing with cases where people get killed, people are getting slaughtered on the roads by drunk drivers, those kinds of things. They're objective. They do a great job at finding people. I'll never forget a year or so ago when they had a woman who was fleeing the country, who had killed a valet in downtown. She was on the plane in Phoenix on her way out of the country, and they had her arrested off that airplane. And we charged everybody involved in that situation. Not only her, but all the people that aided her, abetted her, helped her get on that plane to get out of the state. We charged them all, and we were successful in prosecuting them all. And the reason is what a great job they did in putting those cases together. And that's what we have, and we need the help of the community. If you see someone fleeing, and it's amazing, I've handled cases where we'll see a family get hit and killed, and people just running there, and the cell phones all going on, and people trying to capture that car in a picture, that type of thing. Those are the things that make these cases. These guys do a great job on what's left at the scene, all those kinds of things, the forensics. But if citizens see this kind of thing, you know, take a snapshot, use your phone, call, because it makes a difference. It's going to make a difference in somebody's life.
I covered that case you spoke of when the perpetrators were arrested on the plane, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was about, what, 4 or 5 days from the time the valet was hit to the time of the arrest. Talk about, each of you, how important it is to have this kind of information as much as you can in a short amount of time versus over weeks and months, and how difficult those prosecutions get as time lingers on.
Well, from an investigative standpoint, of course, any case that gets delayed for weeks and months becomes more difficult. The trail becomes more stale. But you know, I have had a case that I investigated as a hit-and-run auto pedestrian fatality that 5 years later we had people come forward and said, no, this was actually a homicide. And we found the car. It had been hidden in a field out east. It still had the damage on it. We were able to bring those people to trial. They were found guilty of, I believe, felony murder, and that case got solved because somebody said, well, you know, I remember hearing something, and I want to tell about it now. Because, you know, folks are going to talk about these things, and we just want someone with a conscience to be able to come to us and say, you know, look, I know something about this. And those are really the cases that you know, tend to go on for a long time, is we are waiting for somebody to come tell us that they overheard something or they know specifically about that. But investigatively, if we have vehicle parts and we have video and we have different things like that, or as Mitch was talking about that case, we implemented what's called a Medina alert in honor of the victim in that particular case. And so we will issue a Medina alert through our dispatch. It's a lot like an Amber Alert. That information goes out to the media immediately. It gets broadcast to outlying jurisdictions, to the local jurisdiction, and we immediately start, you know, seeking these individuals. And our Taxi on Patrol group, that group actually helped us with the Medina case, because they were the ones. It was a taxi driver that saw the car and called it all in. And so, you know, it's all of those entities coming together to help. But the quicker we get it out, the easier the investigation portion is.
You know, and the taxis now have a program where they have cameras, and they are helping they are actually filming things that are happening in the street. The pedestrian gets hit, and they happen to have it on camera. You know, it's great help. The other partners in this, and I know we have to take a break here pretty quick, is the crime lab. I mean, the crime lab, these guys will collect things, small little tiny things off the street and send it to the crime lab. And you should see the amazing work they do in putting back together some of these plastic pieces to show that came from this specific car. And that type of evidence, when you present it to a jury, it's like putting a puzzle together. They put it back together. It's usually the trace section. You're talking about paint transfer. If a pedestrian gets hit by a car, they're going to have paint from the car somewhere on their clothing, hopefully. If they get thrown into the windshield, there may be some DNA that's collected. They go under the car. We now have a new forensic garage. They go under the car, and unfortunately they're looking for fibers, they're looking for human tissue, that type of thing, to tie the victim to the car. But then we also have to prove who the driver is. And that's one of the hardest things that we have to do in the criminal justice system, is to get the driver identified. It's very hard to do in any kind of a driving situation. But the bottom line is that a lot of people would be in a lot less trouble if they just stay at the scene.
Talk a little bit about how maybe some of the reasons why people leave the scene. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I wonder some of it is just fear. Maybe they've got warrants out for them. Why would people want to leave a scene, especially if it's possibly going to be a fatal?
Sure. In a number of prior collisions, we have actually interviewed the suspect driver, and they've given a confession. And these are cases that have already gone through the system. So I can tell you just in general, that's one of the things people tell us. I was afraid. We also find intoxication is part of that. We find that lack of a driver's license or insurance sometimes plays on their mind, or warrants. If they currently believe or know that they are wanted, that can lead a person to leave the scene. But in a number of recent cases, it seems like it's more of a almost that fight or flight type reaction. Oh no, something bad just happened, I'm in my safe car, I'm just going to leave. And hoping that that somehow is going to make things better. And as Mitch was saying earlier, it makes things worse. You go from committing a traffic violation, a careless driving resulting in a serious bodily injury, to a Class 4 felony now.
The legislature's paid attention to this problem. We had a kind of a strange situation in the law where if you were drunk and you hurt somebody, serious bodily injury, you stayed there, you were looking at a Class 4 felony. Well, if you left the scene, you were looking at a lower level crime. So it encouraged drunk drivers that hurt people to leave the scene because they were looking at a lesser sentence. And I don't know if it was just a sheer statistics, but before that law passed, we had a lot of hit and runs where people got hurt. And after that law passed, the Denver Post did a story, we went back and looked, and we didn't have any that we filed. Now, I know there's some that Rob's still working on in his unit, but it was kind of interesting. Well, it seems to have had an impact. But we know things like the weather, things that Rob was talking about. And the reason we wanted to air this show, and we're airing it, is because it is going to be the summer months. And we don't want to see an increase of these kinds of crimes. We don't want to see more people getting hit by cars. And Rob has a good way to show a pedestrian how, you know, how you should be or how a driver should act.
I'm really interested in seeing the show and tell that you have, because I live in the urban city area, and I try to pay real close attention, and even if it isn't my fault, I want to make sure that I'm watching. Can you show us the demonstration here?
Well, in a number of our collisions that are the fault of the driver, what we see is we see a pedestrian who's crossing the street, and a vehicle will begin to turn right or left, and that's a large majority of the pedestrian collisions, whether they be minor injury or serious injury. But what happens is, inside of a vehicle, you have what's called the A-pillar, and that is this connector between the roof and the base of the car that surrounds the windshield. And in every car, they're different. Some are larger, some are smaller. But as you begin to make a left-hand turn, if somebody is walking at the right speed, they will track inside that, in that blind spot, until the point of impact. And we see time and time again, we have officers that go to these scenes, and the person says, I never saw them until I hit them. And same thing happens making right-hand turns. And I can't tell you how many times, I get to the intersection, and I know this, having worked in this arena for a while now, and I'll just tilt my head from one side to the other, and sure enough, there's a pedestrian there. And I think if people would just learn to, keep their head up, look around, tilt the head if you're making a turn, that's all it takes. It's just a simple movement, and we could reduce probably 25–30% of all of these auto pedestrian collisions. But as a pedestrian crossing the street, once you enter that street, you have to realize that you are somewhat in a danger zone, and you have to keep your head on a swivel too, making sure that drivers see you. And if pedestrians understand that, then they'll know maybe that driver doesn't see me. I mean, it may seem perfectly obvious. You may think, oh, here I am. I'm dressed in bright clothing and everything, and they just don't see it.
As a runner, I try to make sure I've made eye contact with the driver or drivers in the intersection to make sure that they really, like to your point, to make sure that they have seen me, to make sure they didn't get distracted by that smartphone or whatever, the screaming baby in the back seat, because it just takes a second to become a victim.
Well, isn't the scary thought, though, is when you try to do that, because when we were taught to drive, it was taught to look at more than the car, to look and see what the driver is doing. And a lot of times you can really avoid a lot of this if you're looking and you're seeing, well, that driver is distracted. That driver is not paying attention, although it's turning. That driver has the phone up to his or her ear as they're negotiating that turn. And as a runner, as a biker, that just has to scare you, I would think. Because there was a time when you would look and they're the person, they may be distracted, but they're not on the phone, they're not looking down. I mean, when you drive down a street like Spear, you can tell somebody is texting because they are a certain distance away from the car. And I say to my wife, they're either drunk or they're texting. And when you get up next to them, there they are, down with the cell phone. And they're trying to drive, they're trying to stay a safe distance away, but you know full well they're not paying attention to somebody coming off the curb, another car coming out, maybe somebody runs a yellow light in front of them. They're just not ready to drive their cars.
Yeah.
And when was it that we had to be on a phone 24 hours a day?
Yeah.
I mean, those of us that are a little older, you used to have to pull over, get out, and put money in a payphone, which I don't think exists anymore. But nobody needs to be on the phone that much. I mean, we used to live our lives without phones attached to our ears, without phones actually plugged into our ears. And now I think they're coming up with things that are go in your glasses.
That's right.
And so you don't have to use your hands at
To
all.
completely block your vision.
But people just need to pay more attention.
Yeah.
And I would like to just say too that what we've seen now are people walking distracted, and that's becoming a problem for us. And you can probably go out almost any day in downtown or in the surrounding area and see somebody walking across the street texting on their phone, and it has led to some of our our bad accidents.
Gotta love the bicyclist who's riding down the street,
Oh,
looking at their
right.
phone as they're riding down a bike path.
Going about 20
and
miles
when
an
I
hour.
see those folks, I just cringe.
yeah, yeah.
And it's like nothing is that important. It's more important to get where you're going safely and not head to Denver General or even worse. And you know, it's just so dangerous to operate a car. It's so dangerous to pedestrians, to yourself, to your family, that it's really something you need to pay attention while you're doing.
And if you do hit someone, I mean, this is, I think, the point you really want to drive home, whether it's an accident or it really is your fault, regardless, stop, make a call, and help that individual. Wait for the police to get there.
You may save a life by
Yeah.
dialing 911.
And save yourself from getting larger charges against you.
Yep.
Lieutenant Rock, thanks so much for being here. Pleasure to see you, and
Thank
I know
you.
you've got your hands full, so thanks for all you
Yes,
do
we
for
do.
the community.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's all the time we have for now. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. I'm Tamara Banks.
Denver 8 TV, your city, your source.